Well, hello there, and welcome to sections 1.4 and 1.5 for AP Psychology. Today we're covering descriptive studies and correlational studies. Now, just want to point out one thing. If you're watching these in order, 1.3 had a beard, was done during quarantine, took a couple months off from doing these. Now we're back in school, clean shaven. Not a different guy. Same guy doing the videos here. Descriptive studies. So there's different techniques because psychology is based on empirical data and using the scientific method. There are different techniques to gather information. You have to select subjects. If you're going to study, I don't know, people's reactions to a scary snake, you have to select your subjects. You're going to have men, women, older, younger. You're going to have different races. You're going to have different ethnicities or religions and things like that. So you have to select those things. And you want to have a representative sample. You want a sample that basically kind of is the broad view of America, kind of a cross section of what the United States would be, or wherever you're doing the subject. Most psychological studies are performed in the United States, by the way, and so you want to have a representative sample. So if you're doing a sample, you want half men, half women. You want different races and all different ages and all that. It's not how big your sample is, it's more the representativeness, that it represents all types of people. Because if you have all types of people, then you can predict the behavior or the mental process for everyone, is kind of the idea. And so there's many descriptive methods that can be used. We're going to go into those. Basically, they describe and predict behavior. Like, if you drop out of high school, you're probably not going to be able to spell like Elvis here saying, get a brain, morons. Deep, deep, deep. So, case studies. Here's a case study right here. When you find a peculiar person, a really odd person, or a weird case, people love to write about them. They're fascinating. There's weirdos out there. We call them Walmartians. If you don't believe me, go to the Rifle Walmart sometime, especially like on a weekend. I like to call the Rifle Walmart the Rifle Rec Center, because if you're bored, you just walk around and see interesting people. It also boosts your self-esteem. You feel a lot better about yourself when you walk out of Walmart after a weekend romp or stroll through the Walmart. This is most commonly used by clinicians. They're unusual cases that can be studied, and they're interesting, they're fascinating. However, they don't predict behavior for a larger sense. They don't apply to the big population. It's usually they act as sources, but they're not really. You can't test a case study for a hypothesis and all that kind of stuff. Observational studies, which you can do the same thing. Like I said, going to Walmart and just people watching, or going. We used to go to the Mesa Mall and just sit around because we were bored and we lived in the 90s. Where you observe people in their naturalistic setting and you see how people actually behave. Chances are you behave different from class to class based on the teacher and your peers, and so you modify your behavior. And so if I was observing you, I could make note of that, and I would see you in a naturalistic situation instead of watching you in a lab and in a study, and I wouldn't get the same behavior. It's good at describing. People watching is fun, it's fascinating, but you're not really good at testing. You can do some things, they're usually the kind of sociological or social psychology in that nature. And then you have laboratory observation, when you bring people into a lab and you do a study and you just observe them. However, people in a lab don't behave how they would at home. Some people like to just look a little weird once they get home alone. They do weird stuff. I mean, hey, you have your own quirks. I have mine. We're all, we have privacy and all that good stuff. And so people behave differently in front of a researcher. And that happens a lot. There's a lot of bias in terms of, trying to see the study work. Here's naturalistic observation. Observing Raider fans in their natural habitat. As you can see, they don't know how to spell either. And if you're thinking, what's wrong with that? You might be a Raider fan. I'm sorry. So other things, there are tests. You can do objective tests and inventories. You probably have filled these out before taking like the SAT. Any personality test usually is an inventory, and they ask the same questions over and over again to make sure they're valid. They can measure your beliefs, your feelings, your behaviors. You can do one to find out what movie suits you best, or what character from Mean Girls are you most like. Your personality matches. There are projective tests where you investigate the unconscious, and these are like the Rorschach ink block test. You can do, paired association. You can analyze dreams. Whatever the test is, a good test has to be standardized. It needs to be the same for every single person. It has to have norms, so the normal person should, score X, and then the abnormals over here and the abnormals over here. It should be reliable. You should get the same data, whether you test it now or 6 months later or years later, and it should be valid, meaning that it predicts you get what it's supposed to. If you have an IQ test and you give it to Einstein and Abraham Lincoln and they score really, really low, that's not a valid test. If you're taking a 10-second IQ test on Facebook, probably not going to work or really help you out either. Surveys are a great way to gather massive amounts of data. You ask people directly, and they can fill it out, and they can give you input, and then you can take all this data, and from there you can look for tendencies and trends. Sampling can be tough though, because some people just don't want to give their opinion. Some people don't want to participate in a survey. It also requires interpretation, and remember this for this class. We're going to say it a lot. Statistics don't lie, but liars make statistics. We probably should say that for government class too, and politicians, but statistics don't lie. Yeah, the stats don't lie, but you can manipulate the statistics. Statisticians are the ones that do lie. Volunteer bias can skew the results. People that are likely to take a survey are more likely to be positive and try to help the survey to do well. Lying occurs because people lie. And they've also found that the types of questions are very important. How you word the question can actually directly affect people's answers. If you can give a survey and it's anonymous, so you have anonymity, that's hard to say. It sounds like I was like finding an email there. And asking the same question several times helps with this. So you kind of reword the question in different ways to make sure it's valid. The wording is key. And so we have some of the most famous surveys ever done in America. Alfred Kinsey, a biology professor from the University of Indiana, did these extensive surveys on the sexual behavior of Americans. This was in the late 40s, early 50s. And they went into everything. Oh my goodness, they asked every question, any kind of perverse, really naughty stuff you can think of. They were asking about it, but they found that in the way that they worded questions was important. Rather than asking a man, have you ever cheated on your wife, they would ask, how many times have you cheated on your wife? And so instead of a yes-no answer, even if a person had not cheated, they could say 0, but people that had were more likely to answer a certain way. And so it's kind of unique. People were fascinated by the male book. When the female book came out, several years later, it was all stormy and controversy, and Kinsey was evil, and it was degrading the fabric of America. We'll talk about that a little later in the class. Correlational studies. Correlational studies are when you have massive amounts of data, and you're trying to find a relationship between two key ideas. So you're going to know whether or not two or more phenomena are related and how strongly they are connected. So measuring correlation, a correlation is a relationship between variables. I know this sounds very sciencey and mathy, but I'll explain it here in a second. A positive correlation means that when one value goes up, the other one goes up. So the taller you are, the more likely your weight goes up too. That is a positive correlation. As height goes up, so does weight. So height and weight, IQ and grades. A person with a higher IQ typically has higher grades. Now, there always are exceptions to everything. We are human. We're all unique. You're all different. You're special. Remember that. Your mom and dad told you that. But we can find tendencies of statistically around most of the population. As education level goes up, so does income. These are all positive correlations in American society. A negative correlation is when one variable goes up, the other one goes down. So for instance, you might have, as cars get older, the price goes down. Now, the weird thing about cars, if you get older and older and older, then the price starts coming back up because it's classic. As you get older, you can't run as many miles. The number of hours you watch TV, your grades go down. The number of hours you play video games, it goes up, grades go down. So that's a negative correlation. And then there's uncorrelated. It means there's no relationship. There's no connection between IQ and shoe size. If you have big shoes, you know what that means? Or big feet, you have big shoes. That's it. And so the coefficient of correlation is a statistical analysis to basically measure the strength of a correlation. That's super advanced statistics and high level psychology. We're not going to go into that. Just kind of know that there's a statistical analysis to measure the strength of a correlation. A perfect positive correlation is a point or a positive 1.0, and a perfect negative correlation is a negative 1.0. That means that every time one thing goes up, the other one always goes up as well. And so those, I can't think of any perfect correlations, but that's out there. If there's no association at all, it is a 0. So on a graph, negative correlation goes this way, 0 correlation, they're all over. And so like this one, as miles go up, the value of the car goes down. There's a negative correlation. The quality of the car and the body color, there is no correlation. Auto accidents going up, insurance going up. That is a positive correlation. So you can recognize those on a graph. However, correlations can be very misleading. There's a thing we say a lot in psychology and in science. Correlations does not mean causation. Sometimes things are just related and it's a coincidence. They're not connected. And so that happens. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Example, they looked at, for a long time in the 80s, the number of hours a child watches TV from ages 1 to 3 meant that they had attention problems by age 7. They thought, oh my goodness, TV makes you have ADD, is what they drove it home. And then they went out and said, well, no, it could be a different interpretation. Maybe kids that have attention problems really like TV because it's fast-paced and kind of keeps them going. There's also the rise of violence in society with the rise of violent entertainment. People think that we have such a violent society right now. Oh, it's those video games and the music and all that. Violent crimes are on the fall or on the decline. For over 20 years, violent crimes have been going down. Our society is not as violent as it used to be. You probably have never butchered a chicken or a pig. You've probably never went to a public execution like they may have back in the Old West. And so it's just a perception. And so things are unrelated. The bystander effect, which is one, it might just be a coincidence. As the number of people goes up in an emergency or an accident, the willingness to help goes down. However, that might just be something weird. They might just not know what's going on. They're confused. There might be someone who really wants to help it and they jump into it right away. This is a really weird one called the Goldberger study. He fed poop to people. and then he got them used to eating feces, not like just straight poop because that would kill you, but he fed feces to people. And then he switched it to corn. And then the people, because they were so used to the feces, got sick off the corn. I don't really remember what that has to do with this. I don't think there's a correlation. It's just weird. That's all. We're going to stop there for today. If you have any questions, let me know.